This morning we're going to be in the book of Hebrews, the first two verses in the book of Hebrews chapter 12, and it reads as following. Therefore we also, since we were surrounded by a great cloud of witness, let us lay aside every weight and sin that so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, who is the author, the finisher of our faith. For the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. May God now receive a blessing upon the reading and hearing of his word. This morning we're going to look at the idea, does the enemy have a grip on your life? Because I am finding it seems like that our world is under the grip of this enemy. Possibly even our nation. Maybe even your family and your own life is being weighed down by the grip of this enemy. It seems like as I turn the corners of life, everyone that I run into, they are also dealing with this enemy of life. This enemy that is robbing us of the joy, it's robbing us of the happiness and the comfort that God provides to us. This enemy is called discouragement, because no one is exempt from it. Discouragement is one of Satan's greatest tools that he uses in the lives of God's children to defeat us. It seems like that he's using that in a great and mighty way during this time in which we are living, and as we go from day to day through this pandemic that is before us. I'm afraid the longer that we stay in it, and I'm afraid that we're going to stay in it for a while, the more and more people are going to become discouraged. People are going to be looking for avenues of hope, avenues of comfort along life's way. I'm finding in my own life that the grip of discouragement is one of the most difficult things that anyone has to work through in life. But it's a reality. It's a reality that every one of us must face in life, especially when you walk through the dark times of life, especially when the valleys are deep, especially when life is uncertain. It seems like that the enemy creeps up on us, and before we know it, we are in the clutches of discouragement. It reminds me of a story that was written about the Hayden Plantoria in New York City. They ran an advertisement in the New York paper inviting those who would like to make their first journey to another planet. To their surprise, they received 18,000 applications. So they took these applications and they went over and they gave them to a psychologist. And the psychologist begins to look through these applications one by one. After reviewing them, they come to realize that all of them had one thing in common, and that was they were discouraged. And because they were discouraged, they wanted to go to another planet and start all over in life. Maybe that's how you're feeling this morning. Maybe you're discouraged in life. Maybe you're living under the grip of the enemy, and it's pulling you down, and it's weighing you down, and it's robbing you of the joy and the pleasures that life has. I believe this morning, as we're caught up in this pandemic, with all the news that we're hearing and everywhere that we go, especially now as the numbers continue to grow, not only in our nation but within our state, we begin to feel this sense of being overwhelmed. We begin to feel like our lives are spinning out of control, and we don't have our fingers no longer on the pulse rate of our lives. And because of that, we become discouraged. You know what I've come to realize about discouragement? Discouragement's a killer. It has killed the churches over the years. Even to this very hour, we have people who are sitting at home, who once sat in the pews of the church on Sunday. Now they dropped out of the race. They dropped out of the church. They quit on God because of discouragement. We are finding as time goes on, preacher after preacher are giving up the fight, and they're laying down their Bibles and no longer proclaiming the Word of God. Spurgeon had this to say about his own life and battle with discouragement. He said, discouragement is an enemy that creeps over our hearts and makes us feel heavy within our everyday activities of life. Maybe there's someone here this morning, you are discouraged. You're discouraged with life. You're discouraged with this pandemic that we're going through. Maybe you're even discouraged in your Christian walk of life. And it seems like that everything around you is spinning out of control. Because for some of you, you've been hemmed up in the house for days. And it doesn't look like there's any end in sight for us. And you're pushed to the limits. And you're just thinking about throwing in the towel. You're thinking about giving up on life. You're thinking about dropping out of the race. You're thinking about quitting altogether and quitting on God. Before you make that decision, I want to remind you that God never saved any of us so that we could live life in a state of discouragement. You don't have to live in discouragement. The Bible teaches us that there is a possibility. There's a possibility for us, even to this very hour, to have victory over the enemy of discouragement. It is possible for you and I to be freed from the grip of discouragement within our lives. God's got a plan. God's got a way to deliver us and get us out of the grip of discouragement and get us out of the devastating effects that could eventually defeat us as God's children of life. In these verses, we're going to look at two very simple steps. And I believe that if we will take these steps and we will apply these steps to our lives, it'll free us from the enemy. It'll free us from the grip of discouragement as we continue to walk through this dark time in which we face within our nation and our lives. The first step we are to follow if we're going to be delivered from discouragement, you got to be committed to continue to run a faithful race that is set before you. In verse 1 it says, therefore also, since we were surrounded by a great cloud of witness, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Now, as you look into this verse, you're going to find out there's two things that is involved if you're going to continue to run a faithful race of life. If you're going to win over the battle of discouragement. First of all, it requires preparation. I've never met a runner who woke up one day and they said to themselves, I think today I'll go out and I'll run a marathon. No, that kind of race takes preparation. So does the spiritual race of life. And if you want to run it, and if you want to run that life well, even in this dark time that we're in, then you need to get up every day with an attitude that you're going to win over the battle of discouragement. You need to get up every day knowing that God is in full control of everything that's taking place around us. If you want to be free from the grip of discouragement, then you got to prepare. And in these verses, it tells us two ways that you and I can prepare so that we can run the race, so we can run it to win, but not only that it will free us from the grip of discouragement. Number one, you must free yourself of anything that weighs you down. In verse 1, there's a very interesting phrase. It says, let us lay aside every weight. The word lay aside means to put or to set down. And what Paul is saying here, we are to put, or we are to set aside anything that would hinder us from running the Christian race of life. How many of you ever watched a runner run? They always prepare before the race. They strip down all the clothing that is unnecessary. They take everything off that is unnecessary, jewelry, whatever may weigh them down, and they set it aside so that they may be able to run faster than their competition. I believe there's a great lesson here for God's children. Anything that weighs us down, anything that hinders us from running the race that is set before us, we are to lay it aside. We are to put it down. Whatever has your attention, whatever has your time, whatever has your resources, whatever is taking your strength beside Jesus. And then the writer of Hebrews says, then we need to lay it aside if we're going to run the race of life to completion. If you're going to be free from the grip of discouragement. But there's a second requirement in preparation. He says you need to free yourself of whatever is holding you back. Look again in verse 1. And the sin which so easily ensnares you. The word ensnares means to be caught in a trap. It's a picture here of an athlete stripping down everything that he can so they can run well. In the ancient Greek, they would run in nude. Can you imagine a runner today coming to the starting line with an overcoat on? Of course not. They shed off all the clothing they can so that they can run the race and they can run it without hindrance. Again, this speaks of the Christian runner. We're told here that we are to lay aside our doubts. We are to lay aside our lack of faith. We are to lay aside our concern. We are to lay aside our change of discouragement. We are to lay aside our grip of defeat. Can I encourage you this morning just to pull up a chair and listen a moment? Yes, these are dark times. Probably the darkest that you've ever seen in your life. Yes, these are very discouraging times. And I believe they're going to become more discouraging in the days and the weeks that are ahead of us. I believe that we're in uncharted territory that we've never been before. I believe that we are living in a time of uncertainty. And if you don't get away from the news, and if you don't get away from places, and if we don't stop listening to people with their opinion of what might or might not happen, it's going to pull you down. And it's going to bring discouragement into your life. Discouragement. It's a tool of an enemy. Discouragement is a killer to the child of the living God, because it is discouragement that pulls us away from God's divine will for our lives. It is discouragement that causes us to put out our light from shining to the point that we point others back to the cross of Jesus Christ. It is discouragement that hinders our influence and testimony before others. That's why I believe it's important that we guard our hearts against anything that would hinder us from running the Christian race of life. We need to guard our hearts, that we don't allow anything to hinder us from allowing our light to shine, to be a living testimony of hope and comfort in these dark days in which we live. Maybe today you need to get honest with God. And you need to come before God, and you need to ask God to help you with those things that are hindering you from walking by faith and not by sight, those things that are hindering you from allowing your light to shine and being a living testimony before others. This morning we were told that we don't have to walk in the chains of discouragement. We don't have to walk in the grip of defeat. The Bible says that God can help us conquer it. Praise God, this morning we can have victory over the things that hinder us from walking by faith. All we have to do is step out in faith. All we have to do is come to God and trust God with every aspect of our lives. And what we're doing, even in the midst of the pandemic that we're in, we're stepping out in faith and we're saying, God, as hard as this is for me, I'm going to give my life over to you. And I'm going to ask you, God, to give me the strength and the guidance and the wisdom to walk through what is in front of me. Listen, don't let the burdens of life, don't let this pandemic that we're in cause you to become discouraged in your race for Jesus. Don't allow it to cause you to become discouraged for living out a life of faith before others. But there's a second thing that's involved in running the faithful race of life. It requires patience. We're told in verse 1, let us run with endurance. That word endurance means patience. Now, patience is not a word that many of us like to have in our vocabulary. Matter of fact, I'm finding that patience is not a word that some people like to have in their character, because it takes a lot of wisdom to live in patience. But I am learning something as I study the different translations of the Bible. They all have one thing in common, and that is we're in a race. And the word race means struggle. It means contest. Every day that we get up, we're in a struggle. Every day we're in a contest against the things of the world. Sort of describes the road that we're facing right now, does it not? You know, life is funny. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes we get up and the sun is shining and it's very bright out and the road is very smooth for us. But there's times that we get up and it's very cloudy in our lives. It's very dark. There's times in our lives where we feel like we're trying to run blindfolded up a hill through a minefield. It seems like at times that life is a struggle, because sometimes life is a struggle. Just like the struggle that we're in now. And it's in the difficult times of life that God calls for us to have patience. The pandemic that we're in, God's calling us to have patience. And what that basically means that we're going to have patience and wait on God. Allow God to work out what He's trying to work out through this in our lives. Because I believe that as He works it out through our lives and we continue to run faithfully the race that is before us, we're going to come out of this much better, much stronger, and much closer to God in our Christian walk of life. I think as we go through life, we're coming up with this false theology that the Christian walk of life should be easy. Yet the Bible teaches us in John chapter 16, verse 33, it says this, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. But be of good cheer, I have overcome the world." I like that word endurance. That word endurance is a very interesting word. That word endurance means setting in for the long haul. It carries the idea of remaining committed to the race in spite of our circumstances, in spite of our obstacles, in spite of what we face from day to day. And I hope that you understand that we're not running a short dash in the Christian life. No, we're running a marathon. So can I encourage you through this pandemic not to become a Roman Christian, candle Christian. You all know what a Roman candle is? A little pop, a little flash, a little burst, and then it's gone. Don't be the Christian that allows your faith to shine for a few minutes and then poof, it is gone. Don't be an Alka-Seltzer Christian. You know, plop, plop, fizz, fizz, and nothing. Stay faithful. Remain faithful to the race that is before you. Plant your feet solid on the rock of Jesus Christ. You, if nobody else, you remain steady. You settle in for the long haul. And you make up your mind this morning that you're going to be committed to the race. You make up your mind that this pandemic or nothing is going to prevent you from running a good race. Running a patient race. Letting your light shine before others. And letting yourself walk by faith through this pandemic. There's a story told about a man named Glenn Watson. Glenn Watson, he was hired to clear some brush on the mountainside. He had worked for 7 hours that day and he was tired and he decided to sit down for lunch. He found this nice big log sitting there and he sat down and he pulled out a sandwich and he began to eat it. He was very content with the surroundings. He saw the beauty of the scenery that was before him. He could hear the stream running in the background and woods all around him. But his contentment was broken by a persistent bee that started to torment him, buzzing around his head and his body. Now, if that was me, I would have probably ran out of the woods by now. But he waved it off. But it returned. This time he swatted to the ground and he stepped on it. But to his amazement, the bee emerged from the ground and it renewed his attacks on him. Once again, Glenn swatted the bee and it fell to the ground. This time, he stepped on it with his 210 pounds of weight. Now, the irritation bee was gone. So he returned to the log to begin eating his lunch and his contentment. As he was there eating his sandwich, he caught something out of the corner of his eyes. He noticed movement in the sand near his feet. And he looked down and he saw that the bee was trying to drag itself back into the land of the living. He was fascinated. This time, he bent over and he watched. He noticed that the right wing on the bee seemed to be okay. But there was a lot of damage to the left side. But to his amazement, the bee stretched out both of his wings and tried to fly. Back to the ground the bee went. He said, surely the bee was finished. He bent over and looked a little closer. Being a veteran pilot, he knew all about wings. He never saw a bee that could fly with one wing and the other one damaged. The bee, however, had the idea that if it kept working, it would fly. So Glenn was still amazed. He was watching. The bee attempted to fly again. Down to the ground it went. It tried to fly a third time. It got 3 inches off the ground and crashed back to the ground. Determined again and again. Each effort, it got a little further off the ground. At last, the bee took off and buzzed over the stream and was gone. Glenn was still amazed there on his knees. He was stunned about how that bee never gave up. I'm finding that discouragement can cause us to lose our motivation. Discouragement can cause us to lose our desire to want to press on. When you're discouraged, that's when the mountain seems steeper than it ever has been. When you are discouraged, the valley looks darker than it's ever been. When you are discouraged, you lose sight of who you are. You lose sight of who's in control of the circumstances around you. Discouragement. Discouragement is nothing more than a warning light. Discouragement is a warning light to tell you to keep pressing on. And maybe this morning you're like that bee and you've been knocked to the ground. Maybe one of your wings is even damaged. Can I encourage you to get up? Be like the bee. Every time you get knocked down, get up. Try a little harder the next day, and try a little harder the day after. And if you do, you're going to come out of this stronger and better than you've ever been before in your life. But there's a second thing that we need to be committed to if we're going to run the race of life, and that is we need to focus on that race. The writer says, as you run your race of life, stay focused. I want to encourage you again. Listen very closely. Stay away from things. Stay away from people who are negative. Stay away from people who think they got all the answers. Because we don't have the answers. Only God knows what's going to happen. Stay away from those who are going to pull you down, because if you don't, you're going to find yourself in a state of discouragement. As you run your race that is before you, you continue to look up to Jesus. You keep focused on Him. In verse 2 it says, look unto Jesus, who is the author and the finisher of our faith. Keep looking up to Jesus. Keep your eyes on Him. Fight the fight that is before you. If you do, He will help you stay in the race. Verse 1 says, the race that is set before us. This would indicate to me that every one of us have our own race to run. I can't run your race for you. Yes, I can encourage you and I can help you and I can support you, but you have to run it. I'm learning this about the race of life. It's all about attitude. Our attitude determines a lot about our lives. Your attitude tomorrow will determine how you face tomorrow. Your attitude for the next week and the next month will determine how you're going to face that time. I encourage you to look up and run the race that is before you. Get your eyes off of others. Because if you watch others and how they live life, it's probably going to cause you to become discouraged in life. If you look at others, it's probably going to cause you to become discouraged. Don't let discouragement get you down. Don't let discouragement defeat you. Don't allow discouragement to hold you back. Don't allow discouragement to put out your light. You keep walking by faith and you be a shining light before others. And you live your life in such a way that when others look at you, they can see hope and comfort and peace in your life. And through that, we can give others hope, comfort, and peace. I don't know what lies ahead. You don't know what lies ahead. But God does. God's in control. God's got a plan already set out. We just have to be faithful to run the Christian life race that is set before us. And as you run it, get your eyes off the pandemic, get your eyes off your circumstances, and look up to Jesus. And if you do, you'll come out victorious over this time that we're in. So I want to encourage you this morning, please stay safe. May God continue to bless you and bless your family. You all have a great week.